have to say just first that I feel very honored to be in such a comradely company. These events are quite rare and precious. That's why I would like to acknowledge the organizational efforts and thank you, the participants, already for the discussions we were having yesterday and we will have. I have to also apologize that I didn't send any material, but if somebody is interested in some articles and stuff after the lecture still, then of course just tell me and I can send it per email or we can circulate it on collectively. So general introduction, why? You know, why am I interested or why this topic could be interesting? In the light of oversaturation with this topic, on one side you have, let's say, this more Yugo-nostalgic view of it. On the other side you have this historical revisionism that demonizes the past, especially like everything connected with Yugoslavia, socialism or partisans. It's a part rather of a negative chapter in history that we want to forget. So it seems to me this doesn't have to do just with the Yugoslav, post-Yugoslav situation, but actually it will tell us something maybe about the European-wide situation. So it can give us some relevant insights. Where do we move, you know, in this deadlock of Europe from Grexit to Brexit, and to think about the control of the past, also in terms of who controls the past also can dominate the present. So what do I have in mind here? We enter into the situation where the European project or the idea of Europe as it was constructed after Second World War has come to a definite break. So this European legacy of importance of economic solidarity, building society on peace, kind of, and a couple of these important pillars in order to prevent the catastrophe to repeat itself, right? So the importance of multinational anti-fascist struggle was kind of one of the main ideological pillars of Europe. And this, when we moved into the period of '89, of the fall of the Berlin Wall and so on, you have much less and less anti-fascist core, and much more and more you would have the stress of the totalitarian man. So basically in August there is a certain celebration of holiday that European Union officially celebrates. It's like, you know, negative celebration, of course, of totalitarian crimes where fascism, socialism, communism, everything like that is equated. And what happens with this, of course, it's strengthening more of the anti-communist stance. And in this situation, at least in the last couple of years, the only holder and promoter of this European anti-fascism paradoxically became Putin's Russia. So Russia today on international scene is the only one who kind of preserved the anti-fascist struggle. So the anti-fascist struggle is now presented in a very nationalist terms, or as one nation that is like carrying this banner on the narrow agenda of its own supposed anti-imperialism. Obviously, this contributed to additional mixing of the divide between left and right in Europe. For example, in Germany, you all know very well for the nationalist movement of Pegida, Alternative für Deutschland, not only that they are opposing Angela Merkel, anti-establishment, US imperialism, they're also very big admirers and supporters of Putin Russia. So on the Liberation Day in Berlin, they would basically, you would have Pegida supporters and nationalist Russians, the first time that we would have huge Russian flags in Berlin. On the other side, so-called or alleged anti-Deutschers, leftists, they would basically come to different neighborhood, Turkish, Arabic, with Israeli flags and American flags, chanting, let's liberate. So everybody is like quite, it's a bit of strangeness in this unique situation now. So these ideological reappropriations of anti-fascist past show also the weakness of the left to gain the support, okay, kind of basically on its own terrain. What was supposed to be connected with the left or kind of left liberal has now become very nationalized topic. So if there is certain kind of left task when excavating this anti-fascist kind of project, is to integrate it in a more kind of deeper project of social transformation. So anti-fascism as such now works in a very strictly nationalist terms. Like the moment is to internationalize it and to connect it to a bit of deeper social project. So like Domenico Lusurdo would say in his War Revolution, historical revisionism actually erased the importance of revolutionary legacy and anti-colonial struggle. With Silvia yesterday, we talked that this historical revisionism also touched the women's struggle as such. So that's like part that is missing in Domenico Lusurdo. So you have the whole 20th century, actually from Jacobinian revolution onwards, is seen as a kind of negative movement of this enlightenment. So kind of these counter-revolutionary forces are the ones that are now, you know, rewriting, revising the history. So this is a very important part that is also European-wide phenomenon. And then yet again, in the crisis, of course, you see how neoliberalism or neoliberal ideology is getting together with authoritarianism, so kind of neoconservative. So this is, you know, you have either the vision of this European or German, Nordic Europe on one side, or this nationalistic, self-enclosed Great Britain, Little Britain, neoliberal nation states. So another relevant insight why to think through and mobilize the partisan legacy today is related to the current Kurdish struggle. So in parts of Kurdistan, especially in the Rojava region, YPG saw an important experience in not only Kurdish, it's a multinational struggle, also Yazidis and other Arabic and other people are joining it, are basically forming liberation national councils, guerrilla struggle joined by the demands of democratic confederalism, which articulates class question to, not to nation, but to revolutionary people. As a Kurdish activist, Dilar Dirik showed very well, political processes within, of course, this proxy and civil war succeeded in constituting a multinational federative structure, which is already now announced, and with a slight socialist orientation and very important steps for women liberation as well. All these different aspects between Yugoslav Kurdish liberation struggle could be made in a bit more detailed way. In our regions, it was Jerko Bakotin that most worked on this topic. Hopefully at some point he also writes a book on it. But yeah, for now we have just like these more loose resonances. But like not to talk just about this academic curiosity, why this partisan legacy is interested, I think that it can show us also some, or give us some epistemological, historical essence of the whole 20th century. Why? First, if something 20th century within this partisan lens showed us that there is no kind of end of history, no kind of teleology, necessity how the history should unfold, right? There is a level of contingency or something that cannot be predicted. So, all the most important revolutions in 20th century happened on the margins, happened on the periphery. Think of October Revolution, think of, let's say, what I call South European sequence from 36 to 49. You have Spanish Revolution, you have Yugoslav Revolution, you have Greek Revolution, all with very much different outcomes, right? Like failed successes, but also like how this sequence moved. And then you have anti-colonial struggle, you have May 68, which is a kind of echo, but also expansion of these revolutions, where, of course, you have the whole range of new subjects entering into the revolutionary politics. Like we talked, the colonized, the worker class, peasants, women, youth, suproletarianized. So there is much more intersectionality already involved in this struggle, at least like from 50s, 60s onwards. It doesn't fit into this neat teleology of sometimes like Second International or still some Marx like vulgar Marxists clinging on, a kind of working class, industrial working class on the West that would be making these revolutions. No, if you even in sociological terms define, but even political analysis shows that this always has happened on the margins and in the marginalized classes. So there was certain much broader class coalitions that were at stake here. 21st century, of course, it's a focus on the South America mostly and what I mentioned, parts of Kurdistan today. So these different revolutions, of course, had in certain way touched the national horizon, or even talked, or like had certain policies around it, questions of economic sovereignty, or how to cut the colonial dependency of the former colonies and so on. So the national sovereignty was an important part. But despite this, that these successful, let's say, national liberation struggles were then forming independent states or certain multinational states, despite this, they were always internationalists. So that's like one of the lessons of the partisan or liberation struggle, that it was always done in the horizon of internationalism, which of course is of importance for us today. So when we speak about the Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, Plan A is basically just not doing anything and staying in this kind of Europe that we are today, right? Plan B would be just like Grexit or Brexit without thinking it how, to reconstitute European or periphery of Europe in a new way. Plan C would be just to go into these small experiments or solidarity, subsistence economies, on, let's say, to the municipal stage. So this we can also discuss in the afternoon. What would be, these different political forms that could be of interest today. Okay, then because Badiou was also mentioned yesterday, I think that one smart remark that he made about this revolutionary sequence that supposedly ended in 20th century had been done with the critique of socialist state, right? Why or where socialist experiments failed in 20th century, even though we have socialist experiments also today. The point where Communist Party or Socialist Party, however you name it, merges with the state. So you would have a model of what he calls party state. That's basically where you lose this autonomy of political, or where you have like this constant reanimation of the Communist Party. So it allows the youth, different voices to be reconstituted an important power inside of it. While once it comes to the merging, of course you have like this drive to the reproduction of power. So this we can also discuss later. As this summer school has, of course, strong reference to the Marxist theory and politics, I was wondering where to compartmentalize this topic of partisan memory, so it doesn't fit completely into these fundamental concepts of Marxism, like class struggle, like very directly. Of course it has to do, it doesn't have to do with mode of production or reproduction. These are all like our surplus value, but it has to do with something that I call mode of reception. So mode of reception, or critique or theory of ideology, cultural hegemony. So this, what I think is where this lecture shall be intervening and can accompany, because today we have also, thanks to Rosa Luxemburg and a couple of different theoretical initiatives, we have good analysis of transition to post-socialism, to neoliberal capitalist state. But we don't have, I mean, we have, but it's not connected or done in a very, let's say, detailed way to bring it together. This ideological critique that speaks about analysis of the strength of historical revisionism in its apparatuses. So what I have in mind here is the whole set, how the state itself transformed itself in the last 25 years. So ideological state apparatuses, museum, cultural institutions, school textbooks, journalistic academic publication. So this all participated in transition into ethnically cleansed, or more or less ethnically cleansed areas which has been pretty brutal, and I don't have to repeat it here. So transitional process as, again, bringing together the nationalist ideology with neoliberal. This, of course, has to be then done from side of critique of political economy, but also like kind of this ideological reconstitution. This is one of the tasks of Marxist theory today, and especially touching the recent wars. There has been no really good Marxist or critical study of the recent wars written. Researching and working with the Partisan archive demands much attention because, as you all know, you have the more nostalgic narrative, but much more extremely problematic is this demonizing archive that pushed all the interesting kind of important discussion of Partisan into the time after Second World War. So the horror places, or lieux de mémoire, memory places that would be called, are in Bleiburg, are in Huda Jama, Kočevski Rog, Slovenia, or even those that were in Second World War, so Jasenovac, are being nationalized, so to speak, how many Serbs were killed, how many Croats, like body count of nationalities. So not talking anymore about the fascist collaborators or the anti-fascist partisans, but everything has been reinscribed, retranslated into the nationalist logic. So this is what Susan Buck-Morss, one of my favorite thinkers of avant-garde, but also like kind of revolutionary utopias of 20th century, says if we are doing the work with archive, we first have to denationalize and deprivatize it. Okay, then she has this emphatic call, only through denationalization, deprivatization, we can set or we can enact a communist mode of reception, right? So as if, you know, we are preparing the ground for training the eye, for training our ears for communism that is arriving. So this is kind of this Benjaminian touch of her, but less ambitiously, just talk it with Raymond Williams, let's mobilize certain past material in order to tell us something today or even for future. So partisan struggle, most of you know. Before I give you a couple of concrete cases, poem, monument, film, I promised. I just want to say that partisan liberation presents a veritable rupture, and probably the only major rupture that happened not in the Balkans, but at least on Yugoslav territory, with very strong consequences in 20th century. Partisan struggle just had 75 years of the first military armed or armed struggle unit in Croatia or in Yugoslavia. It was organized a few weeks already, a few months also after Nazi occupation, and anti-fascist forces was a broad coalition, even though there was a strong kind of presence of a communist party. There were important youth, women organizations that would also contribute massively in organizing people doing the educational and political campaigns. So at the same time, where there was like this kind of anti-fascist military guerrilla struggle, you would have political empowerment. You would have formation of the councils of liberation struggle. You would have cultural and different sections, propaganda section, all kind of. So it would be like a kind of double process of political and military military answer to the fascist occupation. So this was larger than just anti-fascism, right? And this could be exposed also in a very bloody civil war that was happening in Second World War against the forces that were local collaborationists on one side, and against those forces like Chetniks, which were standing on the position of old royal semi-fascist Yugoslavia, Kingdom Yugoslavia. So this was basically, if something, then anti-fascist was the only political formation that didn't operate on the principle of ethnic hatred and was open to everyone but the fascist, of course. In this sense, it also connected, or there was like a cross-sectional in terms of like, if you also analyze the formation, it was like a lot of young, old, it was a lot of young, it was, that's for sure, peasants, intellectuals, cultural workers, basically workers, although there was not so much workers at that point in Yugoslavia, which was more than 70% still a peasant society. Only socialism was there doing modernization later. 1943, of course, we have AVNO. Everybody coming from Yugoslavia knows very well this history. It's like Kurdish today announcing autonomy and federation before it's internationally recognized, right? AVNO in Tito's Yugoslavia, all the delegates that were coming to this special place in Bosnia were basically voting, first of all, for the first time, multinational federative entity of Yugoslavia. Secondly, to depose the king who was in exile, anyways, in exile in London. So who says that revolutions have to be bloody? They deposed him and cut his head, political head, from abroad, and he lived on, but he was not supposed to come back. I mean, that was also decided on a referendum after Second World War. So what? Partisan struggle was based on the multinational anti-fascist solidarity. Remember one thing, Yugoslav partisans were not here alone. There were Italian, Austrian, different Bulgarian, Greek, and other allies that were also joining. But there were different partisan formations that were operating within Yugoslav territory, but also on other side. So there was also what they would suggest at some point, Tempo and a few other people from the partisan struggle, to make international bureau to kind of coordinate these activities in the Balkans. This was immediately cut by Churchill and Stalin. So like any kind of autonomy, you know, within Balkans, and this has very negative, tremendous consequences also for Greece and for the constitution after the Second World War. What my thesis is in the book is that this partisan rupture was so strong to kind of have consequences which would be yielding kind of its effects. Also in 1948, where the partisan rupture with Stalin, the split with Stalin happened when Yugoslavia is basically isolated on international scale and starts internally with self-management model, so kind of critique of Stalinism on one side, and externally, it starts constituting together with some other countries non-aligned movement. So that's like in the 50s, right? So there is like kind of continuation of partisan struggle with other means, or to quote one of my favorite scholars, Rastko Močnik, it's an exceptional situation in which anti-systemic movement was to come or to form anti-systemic state. So state that was supposed to wither away, even though, of course, from, let's say, 50s on, but especially in 60s, you would have a series of contradictions, and especially blatant with the market socialism, which was the start of post-socialism. It wasn't just like a Yugoslav thing, it was also happening in Czechoslovakia at that point, and later on in China, in Russia, and so on. So the post-socialism doesn't start in the 90s, when it's like a stupid diagnosis, okay, now we are in post-socialism because it's temporality, it's before, after. No, post-socialism should be understood as something, you know, that where the real socialism basically dies. And it's precisely in this, from 65 to 74, it kind of comes together with the rise of neoliberalism and so on. There are some other theorists, like Johanna Bockmann, which kind of shows how neoliberalism also took something out of self-management and kind of reinterpreted it in a very liberal way, but I leave that for some other time. Okay, now to the real, what I wanted to talk about. This is already the real topic, since this partisan rupture that I explained briefly, which is a kind of on the horizon of non-state in the Second World War, or there was some kind of coexistence of occupation apparatus, royal chetnik with the let's say they were for a long time supported by the Allies, and then you have the partisan formation. So you have like interesting coexistence and tension, contradictions between all these principles and forms, but only one that is like kind of really popular and has these important consequences for later. It also speaks about something that was silent, that as if Second World War was just about the big struggles of Allies against Nazism, as if there was no revolutionary struggle within Second World War. So that's also the part that I'm interested in. And since many in Yugoslavia that were within the struggle at that point recognize how this rupture, political transformation, affected like what one would call structural feelings of the population, there was a certain necessity of symbolical representation. Already memory on this event emerged already during the Second World War. There was a clear awareness that something precious, engagement in collective project, can also disappear. It's very precarious. It could be annihilated in any moment, in 41, 42, 43, up till Sutjeska battle. It was seen actually that Europe will be Nazi, but in Yugoslavia itself, partisan struggle will be defeated, up till summer of 43. So in this sense, there was this awareness that these precious moments can disappear. To evoke old trope of Cicero, inter armes muse silent, in the times of war, arts are quiet, right? One can only assume that art will have propaganda role, right? We know it from Crimean War, we know it from First World War, also Second World War. You would have a very strong nationalistic or kind of political manipulation, also against women, also like this representation of patria being violated, that's why we have to invade the other, and so on. You have these metaphors, but, and here I relate, I really hope this work will be translated at some point in English. I translated one article of Miklaus Komel's book in English, I really recommend. Maybe this I can also circulate to you. So his book is called How to Think Partisan Art. It's 600 pages book which basically does a kind of Rancierian thing. It's not like a night of proletarian, you know, like where the workers basically during the day they work, during the night they write poems, they debate and stuff. So it kind of criticizes this division of labor. So what he does is something similar. Partisans are not just those that follow some strict discipline of communism or strict discipline of anti-fascism, but have also certain poetic cultural discipline. They are also writing poems. In Slovenia, only 10,000 poems were written in 4 years. This is like what we know, that's the archive, right? There were partisan photography, partisan theater, also importantly Macedonia as such, and its language theater starts with partisan theater groups at the end of Second World War. This interesting research was done also on this recently. Anyways, it's not just about the military, it's about political cultural empowerment process. Also graphic design, literary stories, and so on and so on. So this is what I call when the words become weapons of mass creation. So it's not just like about this massive destruction, it was also like this contradictory move of creation, and where this partisan resistance were first fought and symbolized through culture, right? And then you would have a popular, much stronger popular mobilization. What Komel also, I forgot to give you the slide, this is for 20th century. Okay, this is what Komel says. It was not necessary that masses who spoke up for the first time formulated revolutionary slogans. They were included in the revolutionary process simply by the very gesture of speaking up. Liberation struggle brought also freedom of expression to people to whom this right was denied before. But they fought for it and started exerting it. In the analysis of three artifacts or cultural works, I'm interested in how this alternative process of memorial practice was conceptualized and how it also resisted a too easy recuperation into the state, in this case socialist state. In contrast to Yugoslav political apparatus that in 60s, 70s already kind of consolidated its raison d'etre through what? Through spectacularization of partisan past. You would have massive cultural, objects that would be, having these heroic eps, and we all know about the films on Sutjeska, Battle of Neretva, even kind of Richard Burton would be acting Tito, and so on. So it's like this kind of Hollywoodization of the cultural apparatus on one side, but on the other side there is a much more kind of alternative cultural practices that were doing, or they were trying to continue this partisan rupture with other means. So alternative memory on partisans embraced, my thesis is, a paradoxical revolutionary temporality, which more than about past speaks about the future, which evokes impossible task of constructing communist classless society. So, in this sense, memory is not treated as some kind of social mechanism that just generates collective consensus. It is something not that contributes to maintaining the order. Like Machiavelli, as the first political theorist of modernity, would say, mantenere lo Stato, maintaining the state, it's something that is like feature of every kind of future political society, even though it was not there. That's why it was revolutionary then. But on the opposite, the key also for us to understand is like how to maintain the rupture later. So, or to say, how to reproduce the rupture later, so that the system doesn't appropriate it, that the system doesn't cover it, and so on. That is like a question that is eminent politically today. So the memory on the revolution, art in general, has to be radical not only in content to represent this kind of events, but also in terms of form, how to continue and address in its own way this rupture. Partisan poem. Okay, this is the first one. I have 3 case studies that are short. How are we doing with time? We are still fine, no? It's not too boring or something, it's fine. Just start like really waiting if it's too long or something. Okay, they shouldn't ask, Everything fine. Okay, so partisan poem. Anthem to struggle or dissolution of poetry. First poem, I just took it from a vast arsenal of 10,000 partisan poems and even more. This is not a poem by anonymous partisan, but by someone who was neither famous in pre- nor post-war times. His name was Franz Pinter Schwabe. 1924, he died in 1942. He was a partisan poet, fighter in Steierska battalion. He was poisoned on 23rd of August 42 by a Nazi denunciator, a local collaborator. Franz was taken to the Nazi encampment to be questioned, but he died on the way to the hospital. No image remained of him, no biography, basically nothing that we know through testimonies of other people. What remained of him are his poems. We do not know if these poems were even recited in front of Steierska battalion or read to his friends or comrades at night or to himself. Franz's notes came into hands of Nazis who, with the help of this very local fascist collaborator, translated those notes into German language. Nazis probably hoped to find in this some important messages on the morale of partisans or movement of partisans where they are going, but might very well become surprised to read some of the most striking lines of partisan poetry, partisan or memory on partisan. First poem carried the title Why Poem, that we will read together, and the other one was entitled To the Traitor. and this traitor was also translating these poems from Slovene to German. These notes translations remained in the Nazi hands, and the historical irony wanted that these original poems survive in German language in Nazi archive. Obviously, even his family name, Schwabe, carries ironical twist and translation of Schwabe in our languages. Also in Serbo-Croatian, we usually refer to German, like from Schwaben, as is like a South German region, which says something about his origin. At the end of the war, they were confiscated. This archive of Nazi archive was confiscated by Partisan, moved to Republican archive, where they remained invisible. Well, until 45 years later, in 87, when Paterniu and company edited a huge volume of Partisan poem, and for the first time translated Franz back to Slovenian language. But then another tragic turn, historical turn, arrived, right? This was when suppose that this poem finally reaches more people, its destination, like let's say think about the rupture in the late 80s, nobody cared to read or listen to it except some old partisans. The time was ripe for bloody end of Yugoslavia, where the partisans were denunciated again by local collaborationists that become our transitional political elite. The poem had to wait for more than 2 decades in order for people to start rereading it, and now for the first time poem itself is read in English language that I translated now. Can it be seen? Okay, yes. Why poem? Or to what this poem? We wrote poems in different times when we did not have any other work. However, today, when the law is on the side of the stronger, when the weapons speak, our poem is loud and clear enough. We want to live freely in a free land. This poem is ours is our guide. It is our anthem. This is the poem for which victims fall innocently, fall in the thousands. When this poem becomes a reality, when freedom will approach in all its shine and power, then poets and writers, please come forward. To the fallen victims of this poem, other future poems of eternal glory and memory should be written. Franz Pinter wrote this poem in the spring-summer of 42, when the situation of the military front at home and abroad could be fought as a real united Europe, of course, Nazi Europe. The poem is directed against the realism of this situation. It introduces a complex, condensed, memorial temporality, which makes an attempt to grasp partisan rupture in its complexity. So the poem kicks off, as we see, first referring to the past, kind of, let's say, to the bourgeois canon or to the times of idleness, pre-war poems. And then it calls for the poems of the future that need to be written about the fallen heroes of today. But this future and past role of poetry contradict to this straightforward and self-reflective question already in the title, why or to who this poem is. It's not about just the duty of the poet to speak about the horrors or partisan struggle, but to address the partisan struggle itself, conceiving and abstracting the rupture that had already started. This was a poem that was created within and because of the partisan struggle. In times of freedom, this poem will disappear. So it speaks about some kind of what is so important in more avant-garde frame of self-abolition of art. It doesn't mean that it abolishes completely the art, but that certain different type of autonomy that is much more engaged comes out of it. So as it's important for the discussion about the autonomy of art and kind of how to differentiate it from propagandistic role of art, right? This is a key question, not just for avant-garde, but also later art in socialism or even art today. So the political maxim of this struggle synthesized, of course, is, I bolded it out for you, we want to live freely in a free land. For Pinter, each free land was not imagined as on national state or ethnically cleansed area, but land where everyone could live freely. It is clear that it's not then the task of the poem to change the world, but that's the task for the whole partisan struggle. This poem becomes actually today a reminder which makes us listen to the call of this then not completely achieved task of revolution. Without a new struggle, a new poem to that struggle, Franz's poem will disappear, even if it stays in front of our eyes in many languages. How to make partisan film in a partisan way? Second study, right? In Yugoslavia, there has been a vast area of 200 partisan films produced in 40 years. This was a really, if there is some kind of innovation, if film industry or kind of, it is a partisan genre or genre on relating to that. So from 46, or let's say 48 more, but let's say till 85, there is yearly, think about it, 40 years, like at least 5 films yearly that are on this topic. And you would have everything. It's basically genre platform. There are like tragic, there are eps, there are series, there is like existential drama, there's everything, there's comedy, like really, you name it. Everything is kind of translated into this ether of this. But a part of this mainstream, of course, since I am here interested in more alternative memory on it, that is critical also of the dominant socialist representation in 60s that neutralizes the past and the then present revolutionary energies. I'm talking about the 60s, 70s, where the student youth movement and also worker strikes were more and more present in Yugoslavia. Let us not forget the state ideology was, of course, anti-fascist. Nothing wrong with that, right? What was wrong was the hollowing out of this more revolutionary politics in mere consummation of image. So I choose an example from Želimir Žilnik. His film is called Ustanak u Jasku, Uprising in Jazak, in small village in Vojvodina from 72. This film was actually commissioned by local authorities in order to make a tourist images, so to attract tourists to the region. So they were very pissed at Žilnik when they saw what he did. They didn't want to show it anywhere. But anyways, that's already a different story. The partisans that were inside of this film came to local municipality with guns and said, okay, you have to allow this film, and then it was allowed and showed elsewhere. This is like a small kind of typical Žilnik story that you don't know, it's like, is it true or it's half true, or it's a film with the film and so on. So, but the interesting part, what he did, I wanted to show just a small, because it doesn't have English subtitle, but we can translate. Should I wait a bit? The interesting thing is basically that against this epic, spectacular like representation of partisan, here you have a kind of memorial reenactment. You have kind of reconstruction through the people, through different testimonies that also within the film contradict themselves. So it's like a process of negotiating this history. So he's now talking how the Nazis came into this village. Some people hide here below, then tanks were coming after the... This is the tank. Okay. 2 tanks came. So you have like a form of collective interview, and basically you don't know where the voice is really coming from at some point. Anyways, just that you get a little bit the feel. And the first meeting of the local partisan unit was here behind the houses, and so on and so on. I mean, they go through the whole village and reconstructing the memories and showing how it wasn't just like these heroic deeds on Sutjeska of Tito and his clan, like fighting the Nazis so heroically, but it was actually the heroic struggle of all these small people, some of them going into partisan struggle, but some of them hiding partisans. Some of them, there is also a chapter on hiding the guns or hiding the provisions of food that the Nazis would take, but they would give it to partisans, and so on and so on. So it's like there is a whole kind of organization of anti-fascist struggle that is happening in the occupied cities, in the occupied villages, and also, of course, in the forest. So that's basically where this standpoint of the masses, so to speak, comes on the film, and is basically extremely critical towards the Arendt's, or not critical towards it, but of course, you know, she has a thesis on the banality of evil, that this stupid banality of normal people contributed to Jews getting exterminated, and so on and so on. Like that there is something more inherently bad in these people, right? While here, you don't have there is something inherently good in this, like they're also fighting between each other within the film. So there is much more some kind of following the principle against the injustice. So there is something very political reconstructed from these testimonies of people. And these raw images that you hear here, it's not so much about the laziness of the team of Žilnik, but it's opposed to this more overt aestheticization of partisan struggle. So in this way, my thesis is, Žilnik doesn't make just a film, he makes a film in a partisan way. The raw image brings us closer to thesis that masses are making history on the partisan screen, both in their past as in the present of the film. So the last case study, partisan monument. Sorry, like all my Macedonian comrades and colleagues, I guess you are already pretty saturated with the topic of monuments and Alexander the Great. This here is, of course, about something else. Let's say, also very near here, I want to see in Struga, there is one of these partisan monuments that was interesting, and in other places as well, but kind of from 40s to 80s you have also a lot of monuments that were built, and very roughly we can categorize it in three general categories. First are the popular architectonic. So in 40s and 50s you would have a lot of people that in villages or so on, they lost somebody and they just put like a memorial plaque. It's like it would be done not by artists even, but maybe from some mason and local people organizing it together and so on. Then you would have the genre that was more kind of realist genre. There is not so much socialist realism as such in Yugoslavia for specific reasons that we can talk about. Basically in this it doesn't differ from other memorial genres in the West, right? And the third, there is like a movement from, let's say, mid-60s to early 80s that one can call, let's say, modernist memorial sites, which probably all of you saw on some web pages or internet, or this kind of, there is this now over-aestheticization or this academization of this genre that kind of obfuscates where they try to intervene or what they try to do. So they are abstract monuments to revolution. Usually they are called monuments to NOB, to partisan liberation struggle, or monuments to revolution. What? To revolution, yeah. So one is, generally they refer to as monument to revolution. They took seriously Tatlin question, or Tatlin, who was extremely critical of what was happening in Soviet Union after October Revolution. After October Revolution, you would have hundreds of monuments that were realist, that would be Danton's head. You know, huge Danton's head, or Robespierre, or kind of what Marx would already criticize at that time, is just like imitating, you know, bourgeois revolutions. It's not like going, you know, it's not taking any step further in terms of formal, aesthetical, and even political form. So the question is like how to develop a memorial form that would, in adequate way, you know, address revolutionary politics, past, present, or future. And then, of course, you have the reference to the Third International, which is the first monument that is oriented towards the future, right? Third International at that point is alive. Why would you do a monument towards it? How it can be used, it would be used in different way. Okay, it was not realized, that's why it's a bit more utopian and so on. Okay, this late, it's a modernist, cubist, some of them naturally, some of them have counter-monumental tendencies. They don't portray individual partisans or victims, but are monumental, they're symbolic, fists, stars, hands, even outer-worldly. Many of them are big, designed as memorial parks, where you could also make a picnic, even now today, set in nature. So it's not set in a public space within the city or something that where it would be seen and you would have procession for different celebrations. No, they were taken and kind of, in certain way, over-determine the kind of the nature, right? They become some kind of strange interventions within this natural landscape. So this is done by architect Miodrag Živković. It's a Sutjeska monument or Tjentište, 71. As you see, it symbolizes as kind of victory, but also kind of this gorge, or imitating certain situation on the most important battle in Second World War, basically, where, I don't know, it was 120,000 of Nazis and collaborationists were besieging the partisan army that was moving out with thousands of wounded people and so on. So it was like very bloody massacre, but through quite impressive tactical moves, they not only escape, but they also destroy the Chetnik formation. Chetniks never, after that defeat, they never come back. But this is just one, like the more historical side of it. The interesting part is like you think that it's quite a symmetrical monument if you look at it from one perspective. Once you move through it, these rocks take very different forms. So it becomes clear that it's very asymmetrical when you look from different sides. And this quasi-monolithic appearance upon climbing further up the path and looking down to the monument, the rock seems to turn into wings. From there, one keeps walking along the path to this small museum by Krsto Hegedushic, which this is just like some small thing. This is the path, and you would have something like asymmetrical nature of the struggle that he tried to portray with that. The partisan rupture was authorized in itself, not from outside, and in a similar way, this monumental movement that had at least 50 works, but you can count from, it was like Bakic, Trsar, Raunikar, Bogdanovic, Jamonja, Živković, Vedaković, many different sculptors, architects, artists. that were combined a form of abstraction, aesthetical innovation with political innovation of partisan struggle. So those monuments, even if monumental as such, on the first glance attractive to the socialist or any political power, nevertheless didn't easily fit to the dominant memory genre. Okay, so now it wasn't just about to have this very easy educational pedagogic scheme that you would see, oh, but where are partisans here? Or, you know, where is this historical kind of context? You know, like some people from the party would criticize them for that. But they already unfolded a certain, let's say, relationship to the monument that doesn't delegate a memory. Okay, there is a monument and it memorializes instead of us. No, it's like usually a set of memorial practices. People would come there, it would acquire different meanings, there would be also like different interpretations around it, and so on. So it's like, it's an active moment of memorial project that they were emphasizing. So the last thing, conclusions of these three objects, artifacts, they emerge in different times, use different aesthetical means, if you want, perform different operations, but they did continue the partisan eruption in a certain way. Partisan poem, that was a poem to the struggle, symbolized it, talked of what I said, self-abolition. Partisan film of Žilnik, we have memorial reconstruction, we have reconstruction of the people, like kind of history retelling, and finally experimenting with the form, with the memorial form that is the most state kind of form, you know, kind of most top-bottom, that would be preserving and triggering further solidarity. After 25 years of long institutional march and day-to-day functioning of nationalistic ideological state apparatuses, effects of nationalistic wars and dominant ideology, not of Nazi socialism, but Nazi liberalism or national liberalism, that had to dismantle the legacy of partisan, there is a lot of work to be done for critical Marxist theory and practice. Obviously, to excavate partisan archive means to participate not only in old, but also in new struggles for universal emancipation, which seems to be on the agenda in more intense way in the long crisis in the light of barbarism that is reimagining a new united Europe. Building all plans, ABC, is on agenda. Thank you.